I used to go to Burger King all the time. I'm a big guy and I like to eat, but I never learned to cook for myself. So I go through a lot of fast food drive-thrus, especially Burger King since it used to be the only place on my way home from work that was open 24/7. But the last time I went to Burger King, I had a very disturbing experience. I pulled my truck up to the intercom at a little past 2 in the morning as per usual. But strangely, even after a few minutes, nobody had asked me for my order. Hello, anybody there? Sometimes they don't realize somebody's waiting in line until I say something. But even after I holler at them, they still weren't saying anything. Hey, you in there? I'm trying to place an order. I usually wouldn't use that type of tone with employees, but I was very hungry and cranky. And I didn't want to have to go across town to McDonald's just to get something to eat. Come on, guys, your lights are still on. The sign says 24/7. I know you're in there. Don't make me pull up around the corner. And there I was, still left hanging with no response. All right, fine. I'm coming up to the window. After I couldn't reach through the intercom, I pulled up to the window, hoping to give them a piece of my mind. I was thinking they were either sleeping on the job or ignoring me, and I took offense to either one. But when I pulled up to the window, I didn't see anybody inside. All the lights were still on though, so I knew they were open. I sat there and stared through the window for several minutes, trying to catch a glimpse of someone. However, as it started to get closer to 2:30 in the morning, I realized I could have gone to McDonald's and eaten already, and I was just about to give up. But at the last second, I heard people talking from inside. Suddenly, I was pissed off all over again. Hey, bozos! Get off your lazy butts and take my order! And clean the wax out of your ears while you're at it! I even knocked on the window, too. But it looked like the only thing that I'd accomplished was making the people inside go quiet. It was starting to look like a lost cause I should just drive away from. Then, out of nowhere, the cashier's face slams into the window. He was drenched in sweat with bloodshot eyes and his hands pressed against the glass. He startled me so bad that I was at a loss for words. The poor guy slowly opened the window, and I could see how much his hands were shaking. Good evening, sir. How may I take your order? I'll just have a Whopper, thank you. Will that be all today, sir? Yes, please. Just the Whopper and I'll be on my way. The cashier paused for a moment, and I saw him clench his jaw like he was holding back something he wanted to say. I stared him down and waited for him to spit it out. Are you sure you wouldn't like anything else? We have lots of other food items on the menu. Sides, sauces, desserts, breakfast biscuits, and... Thank you, man. I said I just wanted a Whopper and that's it. But sir, I insist. And I insist that you shut up and listen to me. Just place my order, take my money, and give me my food! I felt bad for yelling at him again, but I was done with playing whatever his game was. His whole body was trembling by then, and he was sweating like a pig. But finally, he nodded and punched it in. No problem, sir. Just the Whopper sandwich, and that'll be $1,000. What? Do you think I'm an idiot? I know how much a Whopper costs, and it ain't $1,000. Matter of fact, you ought to be paying me for wasting my time. Do you even know how long I've been out here waiting for you? 30 minutes, and all I want is one Whopper. So stop playing games and do your job. My apologies, sir. It must be the machine. It's very old. It must be broken. I'm working the whole restaurant by myself tonight, so I haven't had time to fix it. Blah, blah, blah. Quit whining. Your job isn't that hard. Oh, but it is. You see, I was thinking, if you could just give me a tip in cash. What? A tip? You know, just $1,000 cash for holding down the business. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was so pissed off again that I'd gone far past the point of yelling and screaming and reached a boiling point where I was tempted to just punch the scheming dirtbag's lights out. Listen here, buddy. I'm this close to just leaving. But honestly, I'm closer to giving you a knuckle sandwich. Ever heard of a sandwich before? It's what I've been trying to get from you this whole time. I know your machine is working just fine. You're the problem. You lazy, entitled, slimy little snot-nosed brat! Suddenly, the cashier did something bizarre. He now had his hands clasped together and was hanging out the window and pleading with me. Please, sir, just give me the money. I need it. You don't understand. Please, you have to give it to me. You have to. Screw off. I pushed him back and started to drive off. But then to my surprise, the scrawny little twerp lunged forward and grabbed me by the collar. I stopped so I wouldn't accidentally kill him with my truck, and that's when he got even more desperate. Please, you don't understand. Just give me the money, please. There was sadness and fear in his eyes, which made me hold back from hitting him. He was crying as he screamed at me. He froze after a few seconds, so I grabbed him by the collar and set him back a few inches. Get off of me! You're barking up the wrong tree! But then, I was completely taken aback when he whispered,
Please call the cops.
What? Unfortunately, he didn't have time to explain. Somebody appeared behind him and yanked him back through the window. Then, some deranged creep was staring me down, and it was obvious they were not an employee of Burger King. In a second, he charged forward and tried to grab me, but I sped off just in time and raced home. I was so confused and disturbed that I had lost all my appetite, and I called it a night and went straight to bed. The next morning, I flipped the TV onto the local news, and what I saw made my heart sink. The same Burger King I was at was reportedly robbed, and that poor worker's face was plastered on the broadcast as the face of the victim. He was allegedly held at gunpoint and didn't end up surviving the ordeal. To this day, I still beat myself up about it. Maybe I could have saved him. If I had known there was a human life on the line, things would have been different. I can't even think about eating at Burger King ever again. On November 18th, a man entered a Burger King demanding free food. The employees reportedly refused his demand. Things only escalated from there, which prompted an employee to think quickly on their feet. They alerted a customer in the drive-thru to call 911 during the robbery.
I'm a regular customer at Burger King, always enjoying what they have to offer in their menu. Since the food quality had never ceased to amaze me, I had become loyal to this fast food restaurant for many years. Fortunately, one of the branches was situated near my home, making it a 10-minute walk and convenient to get my Burger King fix. I didn't care if my diet revolved around Burger King, and although I enjoyed their Whoppers, it was their chicken tender crisp sandwich that won me over. I was free to eat as much as I could from Burger King, since my husband was rarely home to cook a nice homemade meal, but I never complained as I wasn't the best cook myself. In fact, I've always admired his hard work, and with him being away most of the time, I could get away with my obsession from Burger King since no one was around to reprimand me. So, it was a window of opportunity I couldn't refuse. I would always tell myself that going for a walk as I headed to Burger King was the best way to burn off calories, but deep down, I knew it was pointless, as I would quickly get them back from eating BK all over again. But little did I know at the time that things would drastically change. I was familiar with all the employees working for the Burger King branch near my place, so if a new guy came along, I'd know instantly. Not that there was anything wrong with it, but I felt shivers running down my spine as I glanced at the creep smiling at me as he stared. Then, when I looked across the counter, I was distraught to see that most of their former staff had been replaced. Nonetheless, a change of staff wasn't enough to push me away. I ordered the usual from the creep despite my reluctance, and even when I tried to avoid negative thoughts, he rubbed me the wrong way.
Hi,
I said, unable to look him in the eyes, keeping myself fixated on his name tag. Then I gave my order.
Well, Ryan, I'll have a chicken tender crisp to go, please.
To go? Are you sure? He replied.
Yes, to go.
I said, to go sit at the table? I didn't know if this weirdo was intentionally joking or not, but he was definitely making me feel uncomfortable. So I told him,
I'm sorry, but I'll be taking it home. Thanks.
There's no place like home like Burger King, he said, as he blankly started staring towards my chest. I then placed a few crumpled up bills on the counter and waited elsewhere. A few minutes later, he handed over my order and I immediately got the hell out of there. For a week or two, I couldn't stop the urge to order my favorite sandwich from Burger King, and unfortunately, all the other branches were miles away, a bit too troublesome for me to visit. So, even if I had to see that creep repeatedly, it was something I could endure as long as I had a bite of that tasty sandwich. Then, as the weeks passed, I began experiencing stomach pains that were a bit more severe than the ones I had encountered before. However, I was incredibly stubborn. My husband tried talking me out of it, but I still didn't listen. I kept trying to find other scapegoats to avoid putting the blame on Burger King, but the pain in my stomach only worsened. Then, that's when a thought came to mind. Suddenly, images of that creep appeared in my head, reminding me of how he was hitting on me the other time. So, I suspected that this particular employee was behind this. He must have done something to my sandwich, taking a toll on my health. I was so mad that I told my husband about the creep. Initially, I didn't want him to know, afraid I would forever be banned from buying my favorite meal. But then, I urged him to accompany me to the restaurant to meet the manager and complain about the creep. However, my husband shook his head, telling me it wouldn't be wise since I didn't have any evidence to prove my statement. So, one night, my husband and I decided to do a little investigation of our own. We both dropped by the Burger King, where I had ordered the same sandwich with the creep serving it to me.
Hi, I'll have a chicken tender crisp to go, please.
He snickered and said, "What the hell happened to your radiant glow? You seem rather sluggish and pale today." I ignored him, giving him the payment and putting my sandwich in the bag. Then, I sat beside my husband in the restaurant, took out the sandwich, and began inspecting it. Then suddenly, my partner's eyes grew wide as he said, "What the hell is this?" It seemed like something was moving across the meat. I rubbed my eyes in disbelief, thinking we were imagining things, but we weren't. Upon taking a closer look, we could see about a dozen slugs in it. I felt sick to my stomach. I wanted to throw up. All this time, knowing that I was consuming slugs made me start to act irrational. My husband tried calming me down, but even he couldn't control himself any longer. That's when he went into a fit of rage and started trashing the restaurant, tossing garbage cans and emptying the straw dispensary all over the place. Then he went to the counter and grabbed the creep by his collar, saying, "How dare you put slugs in my wife's sandwich, you piece of shit." The creep then started to act oblivious to what was going on, saying, "Sir, I have no idea what you're talking about." I can tell my husband became more irritated as the man replied without a tinge of remorse. I could tell my husband was itching to deck the guy in the face, but he was somehow able to retain himself. I remember seeing most of the other customers getting up to leave, having lost their appetite after hearing what my husband said to the creep. I then tried to reason out with the manager, but he ended up siding with the bastard employee and kicked us out for causing a public nuisance. Me and my husband were convinced the manager was either in on it, or he was afraid of the damage this would cause to Burger King's reputation. So, we had no choice but to report the incident to the authorities, where we handed them the slug-infested sandwich as our primary evidence. The cops promised to get back to us soon, but as the weeks passed, there was still no news about its progress. Since then, I hadn't heard about the creep or the slugs. This story was inspired by a story that happened at a Burger King branch at Priestgate, Darlington. A young woman discovered a slug in her chicken tender crisp sandwich and accused the fast food restaurant of ignoring her complaint. A spokesperson has since stated that they have begun preliminary investigations on their food management procedures. Upon searching for a follow-up, it seems like the restaurant has permanently closed down.
This story happened a few years ago when I worked at Burger King. I swear it's all true. And in any case, it's a vivid and traumatic memory that I must live with. But despite this, nobody ever seems to believe me. Of course, that won't stop me from sharing my experience. I was a college dropout, so I had to get the job at the dirty Burger King in town so I could make enough money to move out of my parents' house. I was full-time and usually got stuck with the short end of the stick. My boss made me work the graveyard shifts, since the particular franchise I worked at was a 24-hour location. I didn't mind though. The night was very relaxed compared to the day. The longer I worked there, the more I got used to seeing the same sparse crowd of regulars. It wasn't just the drive-thru that was always open, but the dining area too. There were usually a handful of students on their laptops hopped up on the crappy coffee and studying feverishly throughout the night. Aside from them, there were 3 or 4 homeless guys that would pitch in their quarters on a cup of coffee just so they could all have an excuse to chill inside. And towards the end of my shift, I'd always see the same set of corporate businessmen stopping in for a bite to eat before going to work. Honestly, it was a decent job. However, that was only the case until one very different night, after which my life has never been the same. It started off deader than usual. None of the regulars were showing face and barely anybody had come through the drive-thru either. I was the only person working that night, so this was all fine with me. My boss had intentionally put me on the schedule by myself, expecting correctly that there would be very little business to do. At around the midpoint of my shift, the whole place was empty, and I assumed I wouldn't get any customers for a couple hours, so I started to make myself busy by mopping the floor. I went into the kitchen to fill up the bucket, but when I came back out front, somebody was sitting in a window booth on the far side of the restaurant. They were dressed rather convincingly like the Burger King mascot, and had the same crown and cloak and facial hair and everything. The only problem with his costume was just how deranged and weathered he looked. I casually rolled the bucket over near where he was sitting and started to mop in that area to get a closer look at him. I certainly didn't recognize him from anywhere but the Burger King commercials. But since he didn't have any food on his table yet, I was contractually obligated to talk to him. Good evening, sir. Could I help you with anything?
I demand to be served a Whopper!
Well, sure, I can make you a Whopper, but you'll have to come up front and pay for it. The man then gave me a death glare.
Fine! Have it your way.
He barked at me as I walked back to the counter.
Where do you think you're going? You're supposed to let the king walk ahead of you, peasant!
Sure, go ahead. He then cut me off and walked up to the counter, waiting impatiently for the 3 seconds it took me to catch up. I punched in his order and told him the price. That'll be $6.49, sir. All I got for another tense moment was the same hateful look in his eyes, until he reached into the donation jar on the counter and pulled out a random fistful of change and threw it at me.
Keep the change and never ask me to pay for anything in my own establishment ever again.
Finally, he turned around and went back to his seat. I contemplated calling the cops on him for essentially stealing money from needy children, but then I thought I could take matters into my own hands and get back at him for emasculating me over a couple of dollars. I retreated into the kitchen to make his Whopper, and I made it with a special ingredient. I got out the lettuce and set it on the floor, then stepped on it, jumping up and down a few times while cracking myself up by saying the old line,
Number 15, Burger King foot lettuce.
Once I was done entertaining myself, I constructed the sandwich and brought it out to the needy Burger King. Here's your Whopper, sir. Have a good night. I started to walk away, only for him to snap his fingers at me. Can I help you, sir?
Do you really expect me to eat this by myself? A king must never eat his food with his own hands. You must feed it to me, you idiot!
I'm sorry, sir, but that's against our store policies. At least I think it is.
I am the king of this joint. I make the rules. So get over here and fulfill your duty before I shove this Whopper up your mom's wop!
Suddenly, I was a little scared. I wanted to avoid escalating the conflict with this Burger King guy, so I gave in and decided to feed him like he wanted, hoping he would go away if I did what he wanted. On the positive side, it had the added bonus of ensuring he ate the special recipe I made for him. I was nervous though. My hands were shaking as I reached down and picked up the Whopper, then gradually brought it up to his mouth. Open wide? I guess. And that's when one of the most horrific, memory-haunting things I've ever seen happen. The Burger King's mouth jerked open and stretched inhumanely. And that's when it happened. He lunged at me, clamping his teeth down on my wrist and devouring the sandwich in my entire hand in a single bite. I screamed in pain and tried to break free, but his jaw's grip was on me like an alligator's. As he started thrashing around, he pulled on my arm and flailed me back and forth, repeatedly slamming me down on the table. Leave me alone or I'm calling the cops! Somebody get this guy off of me! Somebody help! I woke up from a coma in a hospital. The first thing I did when I came to was look down to my right hand, only to see a wad of bandages, but no right hand. As soon as I could speak, I tried to tell my parents what happened to me, but when I did, they just looked at me like I was crazy. They tried to tell me some BS story about an alligator that snuck out of the lake behind the restaurant and ambushed me when I took out the trash, but I knew that couldn't be true. The funny thing is, I was fired from Burger King and barred from ever entering it again, as though it were all my fault. I'm not even allowed to see the security footage of what happened. I think the BK Corporation put a gag order on my parents and told them to lie to me. The only reason I can think that they would do such a thing is if the Burger King himself was more than an urban legend, but an actual real person, if you can call him a person. Number 15, Burger King foot lettuce.